the outlook for innovation in supply chain services. My guest is Robert Sutton. He is Executive Vice President for Innovation with BNSF Logistics. Hello, Robert.
Hey, how are you doing? Nice to
Great.
meet
Thank
you.
you very much for being with me. You know, this term supply chain services is a little bit vague. It can incorporate just about anything in the supply chain. So I'd appreciate it if you could define for me what are the types of supply chain services we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, I think in terms of looking at across both global but also domestically in terms of some of the activities of moving freight, because in today's market, certainly supply chains are not just domestic, even though that's where we predominantly handle services today. But I think in terms of the impact that we've seen, really looking at across the supply chain, both international and domestic, and understanding the impacts of clients, whether that's from the pandemic related activities or other things that are really challenging customers and suppliers in today's market.
So the discussion includes then the actual physical movement of goods, right? And then whatever supports that in terms of technology, information flow, support of that. I mean, is that the whole basket of stuff we want to think about when we use that term supply chain services?
Yes, absolutely. And I think in terms of, upstream and downstream along those lines as well, not only as you just mentioned, the movement of goods, but the movement of information that accompanies that. And then some of the challenges that we've seen certainly in the last bit relative to some of the, choke points and other things that have really impacted customers. And then how do we apply innovation relative to that in order to solve those challenges?
Okay, so that being the case, let's talk about how these supply chain services have evolved in the time of pandemic. What changes have we seen in what the marketplace is getting in terms of supply chain services in the last 2 years?
Yeah, I think in terms of, we've seen significant shifts in the last couple of years, specifically related to the pandemic because of all of the demand that has come through the system in the last couple of years. And we watch closely, what's happens on the economic front for the entire country, but also as it relates to our customers and the impact that has on their supply chain. So we see the significant demand signal that the market received over the last couple of years, largely driven from stimulus in terms of goods, which ultimately turns into product that needs to get moved through the supply chain. And I think what we've saw the last couple of years is that, the constraints of that supply chain, while we've moved more goods last year than ever before, we saw strains in that network, specifically around terminal operations, whether that was at the port locations or inland locations in some cases with the rail networks that really constrain things and cause some product to need to get shifted over to highway, which further constrained that network. And so customers were left in a situation where warehouse space was at a premium, capacity across all modes was at a premium, and just making sure that you had product on shelf, especially for during the peak season, and for the holiday season was something that was really important for our customers in terms of making sure that they understood all those different options. And I think that was looking at how these different aspects interacted with one another to really try to solve those challenges.
Well, notwithstanding these constraints and severe congestion and labor shortages and the like, that doesn't seem to have caused customers to be any less demanding than they were before for high quality service. What is it they want from service providers today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's things that customers have looked at for quite some time, right? Looking for, as you allude to, very high quality of service in terms of on-time pickup deliveries, making sure that their product and their material is handled with care when it's in the custody of the third-party logistics provider. And then, in terms of looking at, again, what's the lowest cost to serve to make sure that you're meeting budgetary constraints that they may have as well. So I don't know that the equation has largely changed significantly. It just means that you need to be more creative and innovative when you're looking at things in these constrained market times, because some of those variables are a little more challenging to control than at other times when maybe capacity is much more available and is surplus.
Okay, so that being the case, let's talk about some of the innovations that the industry has responded with in response to these customer demands and congestion and the pandemic and equipment issues and labor issues, what are some of the innovations that have been put into place in order to address these challenges?
Well, one of the things we've seen is that you've seen much more collaboration with supply chain partners in terms of visibility of information. So again, if you have material that's moving from an overseas supplier in through the ports, West Coast ports, and on into the country, as an example, understanding not only that where that material is, but also where it's at specifically in the supply chain, so that you can make changes on the fly relative to shifts in that capacity to supply that. So in other words, if you've got a whole bunch of containers coming in, some may become hot, right, in terms of demand from customers, and having visibility to that, and then being able to collaborate with the supply chain partners, whether that's the ports, the dray carriers, the intermodal providers, the truckers, et cetera, to make sure that the product that has the highest level of need is really being serviced, I think is some of the things that we're starting to see more of, where, historically, again, even we've seen collaboration across what would traditionally be considered competitors in order to service those those customers' needs.
So it has been up to this point a modal problem, a handoff problem, has it not? When freight moves from one carrier to another, from one mode to another, from one location to another, it's been a challenge getting the information to accompany it, to go along with it in a real-time basis, but you're saying that it's better now?
Yeah, I think you're starting to see that. I wouldn't say that we have reached a place from a supply chain standpoint where we need to be in order to do that, but we're certainly seeing a lot of technology that's coming into place now, with visibility becoming much more available. If you think about what's happened in the last few years relative to ELDs and the mandates it requires, it's given us much better visibility to trucking companies, locations of trucks. The ports are starting to provide much better visibility of containers in the port, where they're located, and other information like that. And so while there's been some of that that's been coming along, I think, it's just been exponential, I would say, in the last couple of years in terms of those sorts of technologies that start to help us unlock, areas where we can start to drive out some of the waste that we've traditionally seen in the supply chain as well.
You think that service providers themselves are responding to this, not only with this type of technology and collaboration that you just described to me, but also trying to take on a bigger piece of the supply chain themselves, moving into areas that they did not previously serve in an attempt to assert greater control over lengthy moves on behalf of their customer base?
Yeah, I think there's some of that, certainly, in terms of looking at, how you can help a customer solve their problems by, again, either through consultation, collaborating with them, or in some instances, potentially taking over larger aspects of the supply chain, so that, they have a single, entity that they're working with that really has visibility across that, to be able to influence and drive, real ability to influence the changes that they need in order to deliver goods to their customers.
Well, thank you, Robert Sutton, for those insights into just where we're seeing innovation in this wide range of supply chain services in response to the pandemic, congestion, and just the regular transformation of services as they get better and better in response to heightening customer demand. I want to talk now for a few minutes, though, about BNSF Logistics itself. Tell me where you guys fit into the picture in terms of the services you provide.
Yeah, so we are a transportation intermediary based in North America, and most of our services are within, the North American continent in terms of U.S., Canada, and Mexico. We provide a lot of over-the-road truck transportation, but we also work closely with some customers in the industrial side of the business to solve more complex solution sets, leveraging engineers, technicians, et cetera, in terms of being able to provide solutions that are more complex in nature, specifically around the renewable energy space that we're seeing is becoming so prevalent in the investment side of the U.S., but also around the world.
The BNSF name suggests that you have ties, obviously, to the rail industry. Does that mean that you have a presence in intermodal as well in what you're doing?
We do some intermodal work today. It's somewhat limited, but we do a lot on the carload side of the business in terms of moving rail cars of components for clients. Again, typically as part of a broader solution set as we look to add value to the supply chain.
So what do you think your customers are going to be wanting from you, specifically BNSF Logistics, in the coming months and years that maybe they haven't asked for before, or at least not to this degree?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and we're investing heavily in terms of looking at how we continue to create a better customer experience on our brokerage side of the business as it relates to collaborating with other supply chain partners, as we were just talking about, as well as really leveraging the technology investments that have been made and are being made in the industry. I think if you look at what's happening over the last few years, the supply chain is no longer the end, right, of what is considered when customers are thinking about moving goods or the sale of goods, but becomes much more critical and important in terms of sourcing decisions and other things. And so what we're doing is looking at leveraging some of those technologies and implementing some of those within our stack of systems so that we can provide that full end-to-end visibility we talked about, make it very seamless and easy for customers to transact with us, both on the front end, as well as for us to easily source capacity to fulfill the needs of our clients.
Robert Sutton, I want to thank you once again for helping us to understand what are some of those innovations going on out there in the world of supply chain services, as well as telling us a little bit about BNSF Logistics. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Take care.